Welcome to the new episode of the A2 Pod, the podcast of ABH2-UK PACT project. We are here with Maria Torrent, Executive Director of Hydrogen Europe. It's our pleasure to have you here with us. I am Giovani Machado, President of the Advisor Committee of ABH2 and PMO of the ABH2-UK PACT project. And
hello, all. My name is Gabriel Lassery. We have seen each other over here sometimes before, and today we have a very special guest, Maria Torrent, and thank you very much for being here with us today. We have talked for so long so far, but I think this is the first time that we talk to each other in person. And how are things? how was your trip to Brazil? How do you like Brazil? And please tell us a little bit more about yourself before we get into the hydrogen scheme.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. Thank you very much, Giovanni, for inviting me to this H2 podcast. It's a very nice occasion also to be able to address to your audience. As mentioned, my name is Maria Assumpció Rojo. I work as Director of International Advocacy within Hydrogen Europe. And as you may know, our organization is representing the European hydrogen industry in Europe across the full value chain. So representing from the production to transport, distribution, and different end users, also the manufacturing of technologies. And our work has been very much focused since the adoption of the European Hydrogen Strategy in 2020 on the deployment of the EU ecosystem. But this doesn't mean that we're looking only inside. Since REPowerEU in 2022, after the war on Ukraine, the European Union really needed to diversify supplies while decarbonizing and looking for new decarbonized sources of energy. And this is where we saw a turn also in the relationships, not only of the European Union, but of Hydrogen Europe. Because from one day to the other one, we started having relationships with third countries officials and also industry. And I must say that also our members, that are 600, mainly companies, but also national associations and regions from all over Europe, were also starting to look into the possibility of deploying in other geographies, including Latin America. Mm-hmm. So what makes sense since then is that Hydrogen Europe accompanied this effort and also worked with the European institutions to support them also in the relations that were starting to open at the time.
That's good. And you mentioned the association started in 2020. Did I get it right?
No, the association started much earlier. Okay. But what we saw is that since the adoption of the European Hydrogen Strategy in 2020, it grew a lot. Yeah. We saw that there was an alignment finally between the industry potential and also the public sector that gave finally the attention to this sector that it had not received before, apart from a research and development perspective. Mm-hmm. So Hydrogen Europe brought together all these industrial efforts and to deploy also the EU ecosystem, as I have mentioned before. And it grew a lot since this very moment, of course.
Should be hard to have the compromise of all the interests involved. Can you say a little bit about that?
It's true that it's a little bit complicated because representing different parts of the value chain, also different production pathways, might seem a little bit contradictory. But at the end, this is the richness also of our association. The idea is to propel net zero neutrality by 2050, and hydrogen, it needs to be part of this. So it's about considering what are the technicalities that need to define hydrogen in this transition, what are the timelines, and this is something that we are doing internally. And for that, we have also a governance that allows us to do that in a smooth manner. This is also the type of discussion that you could have about do you want to give priority to the deployment of a European value chain? Are you open to imports at the same time? So these are the types of discussions that we are having internally, and this also applies to the different types of hydrogen, etc., even if the objective is really to decarbonize with hydrogen. And here I think all solutions are very much welcome and have their place in our association.
And you mentioned that, well, during this era, during those years, the Hydrogen Europe grew a lot. And we also experienced that in the Brazilian Hydrogen Association, and maybe around the pandemic time, we grew from, well, about 3 members to almost 100. And we see that the Hydrogen Europe also has this role, or this more technical role for researching information for hydrogen, and also for publishing information for hydrogen. This is also something that we do as the Brazilian Hydrogen Association. I don't think that many other associations do it, but I think this is important for the growth of this market. So I know that the Hydrogen Europe has the European Hydrogen Week as their own conference, and they also have a specialist team, a technical team, for bringing up information about hydrogen. So what could you tell us about this?
I'm very glad that you raised that, because this is one of the strengths precisely of our organization, is that we're creating our own data. We have a very strong team, which is under the banner of market intelligence, and they are developing reports. They are doing also annual monitoring of the deployment of hydrogen in the European Union. In the context of the European Hydrogen Week, which is our flagship event, our yearly flagship event, where we bring together all the hydrogen community. They present also what are their new findings. And this is very important, because this helps us also contrast these numbers with the ones that are being used by international organizations, by the European Commission, and they know that they can come to us and also rely on our data. And the reason why they can rely on our data is because also we retrieve this data from our members. We have a database, we contact them, we verify how the projects are developing, if they are reaching final investment decision, if they are having any hurdles. So we have quite a good understanding of the pipeline of European projects, what type of projects are they, what is the state of advancement, and when they have good news, we are the first ones to be informed. So this is extremely valuable, and really this is something that we were very happy to exchange always on with the larger public. So as you can see also through our site, which is very well nurtured, you can find lots of information, and we always invite everybody to have a look at this information, to get knowledge, and to come back to us also if there's something that they want to exchange us with.
This kind of technical approach helps a lot to build consensus, right?
This should help to build consensus. Now this is technical, so this is bringing up the data, counting on the numbers, determining what's the status. But afterwards, another thing is the reading also of these numbers. And this is what the policy team was going to do, considering also the regulatory developments that are into place, to put this in a larger perspective and to make them meaningful for this purpose.
And well, ABH2 also has this vein, for this more technical vein, and this has also helped us a lot in developing the regulations of the hydrogen framework in Brazil. So we assisted the ministries in Brazil in general in developing those regulations, and we are in this state, well, actually waiting for the decree for hydrogen. We have the hydrogen laws, and we are waiting for the decrees and the regulations. But has this more technical side also helped Hydrogen Europe in assisting the European Commission in the delegated acts in the renewable fuels of non-biological origins in the recently released low carbon regulation? What could you say about this for us?
Absolutely. This is the main objective. First of all, to understand what is the readiness level of the industry, but then also to understand what would be the impact of the different political choices that the European Commission is putting on the table concerning the hydrogen sector. So we are trying to build our own assessments. Internally, we're also concretely determining what will be the specific impacts of certain rules. For instance, concerning the RFMBO delegated act, we also studied what was the cost of applying the additionality, and we found out that around 20 this applying the additionality principle, which requires matching between a PPA and a producer of hydrogen, that the electricity that is going to be used needs to be established in a certain location during a certain timing, etc., and a number of certain other criteria. So complying with this criteria, which is very strict, might add an extra cost between 25% and 35% to the kilogram of hydrogen. So these are elements that are very important to provide on time, also to the European institutions, for them to understand what is the impact of the regulations, and to, if they cannot consider it for ongoing processes, at least for further amendments and potential simplifications.
And we saw, well, of course, there's the renewable fuels of non-biological origins, but there's now also the low-carbon hydrogen regulations. And we see that, all the different technologies are taking shape into looking at hydrogen based on those emissions. And this is something that we're looking to do in Brazil. So the National Hydrogen Certification Schemes will be based on emissions, and the whole National Hydrogen Strategy in Brazil looks at hydrogen from an emission standpoint. So do you think that those regulations in Europe and Brazil, maybe they are converging into the same place to look at hydrogen based on their emission?
It's a very good question, because you seem to be a little bit more pragmatic than the European Union, focusing on greenhouse gas emissions, which is also the case of the European Union. But on top of that, we have other criteria. I have been mentioning additionality for the delegated act of RFPOs, then the delegated act also on low carbon hydrogen is also aiming to reduce greenhouse emissions, and this is something that we see it also in the consideration of the upstream emissions alongside these direct emissions that are going to be considered. But we also see that there are some additional rigidities, and the system is a little bit more complex. So I would say that the baseline of reduction of greenhouse gas emissions is very important, because this is really to suit climate objectives of the European Union towards 2030. And now you know that the European Union proposed a new climate law some days ago that aims to reduce by 90% greenhouse gas emissions by 2040. So this is creating an extra, let's say, appealing effect also for decarbonized hydrogen. But we know that the strict criteria that the European Union for the moment has applied on top of that might be creating some hurdles. But the baseline is the same. I think that when we're talking about emissions, we need also to refer to the certification of these emissions. And in relation with that, we see a very scattered system for the moment. I think you can maybe tell me more about also what's going on in Brazil, but in the European Union, we have this voluntary system, which is called Certify, which is being used and assessed in different geographies. But we're seeing also other certification systems which are bringing also different criteria that are relevant on critical aspects for the different geographies, like water management, also consideration of people's rights, etc. So what can we do with all that? I think that if we want to consider hydrogen as a global commodity in the future, we need to make all this a little bit more smooth. And if we keep different systems, that at least they are interoperable altogether, that there is mutual recognition, and that they are accepted in the other geographies. So we're still far away from those. We see that this is, having different systems is creating also some hurdles, because
Entropy. Creates entropy.
Exactly. And we can see that, for instance, if you want to certify hydrogen according to the EU rules, like the delegated act on RFMBOs, we have identified that there are a number of things, of criteria that might be problematic in third country geographies. We know that, for instance, bidding zones the geographical correlation does not apply to all the geographies in the same manner. We see also that there is another problem, like the accumulation of aid, namely touching the renewable energy sources. This is happening many times in free economic zones, port zones, etc. So we see that it's very important to be able to understand the rules and to be able also to certify according to these rules the hydrogen that is going to be traded, because this transparency is very important, and also in terms of credibility. So we see that having different systems is not an easy thing, but I think that we should tend towards a simplification and towards a system that allows everybody to certify according to the same rules. And here I think that you have been also looking into the hydrogen passport that was proposed on the European side a couple of years ago. I think that this could be also a good way forward that could facilitate the trade of hydrogen and the certification of hydrogen according to the different rules.
Interoperability is key to have a global market, hydrogen market, and also to have like liquidity and also competitiveness, right? I mean, it's fundamental to have different sources, different possibilities, since you assure the certification of the carbon intensity.
Exactly.
So you mentioned the mutual recognition of certification schemes. I think that this is a very important topic because we're always mentioning the off-takers for hydrogen, creating demand for hydrogen, and the sustainability of this hydrogen. So how to make sure that this hydrogen is in fact low emissions hydrogen. So if we look maybe into 2030, we can estimate about 13 times the growth of the low emissions hydrogen from the market that we have today. But we need to make sure that this hydrogen is in fact low emissions hydrogen. So what we're looking to do in Brazil, we are looking to building this national hydrogen certification scheme that is based on emissions, and that is also based on the international standards. So for example, the ISO 19870, and looking into the life cycle assessment for this hydrogen from the extraction of all this raw material until its delivery into the consumption gate. But well, this podcast is one of the projects of the UK PACT project. This is a project that the Brazilian Hydrogen Association was contemplated with, and this is one of the many initiatives that we have to promote information on hydrogen and to promote good information on hydrogen. But one of the other deliverables that we have is to help structure hydrogen hubs in Brazil, because we think that the hubs are maybe one of the most important key points for creating demands. So we know that producing hydrogen may not be as big as an engineering feat anymore, more of an economics of scale, but transporting all this hydrogen and storing all this hydrogen and making sure that this hydrogen is low emission, this is what we are trying to achieve. So how does Europe look into all this demand for hydrogen? Where is it looking to source this low emission hydrogen from? Is it looking into sourcing from one specific product more than the others? And how does Brazil fit into this partnership for Europe, both in developing projects, in joint projects in Brazil and Europe, but also supplying low emission goods to Europe and vice versa?
This is a very wide question, but we'll try to go through it. I think that central to it, it's what's the situation in Europe. In Europe, I think that like elsewhere, we are not seeing the boom maybe of projects going to final investment decisions that was foreseen. Still, we have a pipeline of projects that is now starting really to consolidate. And we can see that there is a steady process. So we have more and more electrolytic projects, thermochemical projects also coming online that are already into construction, operational. So I have here a few numbers, 500 megawatts of electrolytic hydrogen being produced or ready to be produced, 240 megawatts for thermochemical. and this is engagements. So this is happening, and this is very important. But this is very much dependent on two factors. On one side, the definitions that they are, first of all, there, and now we have the low carbon hydrogen delegated act that is completing the scene.
And I think it was very anticipated by the industry.
Exactly. And it's important to have these definitions ready to be used. They took a lot of time to come, but finally they are there. And this is a very good thing for project promoters and also for investors, because this is giving them a warranty of what they are doing that is fitting with the legislative framework, so regulatory-wise. And afterwards, there is the demand. And I think that the demand side is important for both our domestic producers, but also for potential exporters, like Brazil. I'm going to be very clear. And for that, where do we stand in relation with these targets? I think that Europe has been the first geography to establish some targets for hydrogen consumption under the RED III directive, which establishes for industry and transport a target of 42 of replacement of hydrogen in industry that is already using it, 1% minimum of RFNBOs for the transport sector. And then we have a list of also other regulations that are establishing some quotas or greenhouse reductions for the aviation sector, for the maritime, also for cars and heavy duties.
Carbon border in general.
Exactly, and this carbon border adjustment mechanism that aims to establish a level playing field with this type of products that are produced abroad and avoid carbon leakage. So we have altogether RED III targets would amount by 2030 to some 2 million tons of renewable hydrogen. And when we compare that with the projects that are starting to be online, they amount to 13% of those. So we are not there yet. And the problem is at different levels. I think that there is still uncertainty. Having a target at a regulatory level, if it's not followed on the implementation level, it's not really that helpful. And the RED III directive, because of the European system that we have, is not a regulation that is going to be applied directly by member states. This needs to be transposed in member states, and they have a margin of maneuver on how to transpose it. So these RED III targets have sometimes been implemented, establishing some intermediate timelines, like in Finland and Romania, but the other ones are not establishing intermediate timelines. So the ramp up cannot be done between 2025 and 2030 if you don't consider anything but 2030 as a target. And then there are only 2 countries that are also establishing penalties for the companies that do not implement. So you see, if you have targets, but you do not have the tools to make them happen at the end, you might end up without having a real strong tool. So I think that in terms of implementation, this is super important, because when we're trying to say, okay, how are we creating markets in Europe or elsewhere, the target seems to be a very useful tool, but this depends on how afterwards this is really implemented.
Do you think that the business environment is maybe either more important than the carrot and stick for developing the hydrogen market or not?
Well, in Europe, we have quite a market that is regulatory driven. So it's very important to create this energy transition with the support also of the regulation, because of the cost also of this transition. If you leave it only to stakeholders, it's going to be very difficult. So having sticks and carrots, having a compulsory approach that establishes some targets, but that can then be implemented with also some penalties that can be incentivized also with some state aid to go there, with some labels, etc. This can be very important. We cannot leave it just to the market to evolve. Otherwise, we will not achieve the objectives.
You mentioned there are 2 countries that have established middle points target for the RED III.
Yeah.
So what do you think are the bottlenecks to reach those targets? And what do you think maybe is keeping the other countries for setting those middle points or for reaching those targets? Infrastructure or human resources?
When I said the middle points, maybe it was not very clear. What I meant is that they are considering intermediate targets, because this is what makes it really pragmatic and feasible. If you have a target of replacing hydrogen that is used in industry by 22% in 2030, which is the case, but you do not consider a progressive approach as from 2025, you will end up in 2030 by not having this implemented. This is what I was meaning with that. And then the examples of Finland and Romania, I think that are very useful. Together also with the examples of Czechia and also Romania for the penalties. Sticks and carrots, this is what will help the implementation go forward in a way. Yeah, I think that, as mentioned, this is something relevant for to give the positive sign to the production of hydrogen in the European Union. This is also valid, I think, for creating markets in third countries, EU partners to the European Union, and Brazil has a great potential there as well. Even if many countries in the LAC region have been oriented, first of all, their strategies towards exports, either to Europe or to Asia, I think that the potential is there also to develop a market, and I think if this is followed, looking into the European example of what has been working or what could have been improved, it can be very useful.
So you mentioned this creation of demand for hydrogen. What sectors do you think are the prime sectors for consuming all this low emission hydrogen? In Europe, at least.
Well, I have been mentioning which are the sectors. When we have this replacement target of 42%, this is the sectors that are already using hydrogen. But contrary to what you could think, refineries are not mentioned. So this is another incoherency, is that they are using hydrogen. This is possibly one of the sectors that could absorb more easily the premium of using low carbon hydrogen, renewable hydrogen, but they are not mentioned. So this is something that should be addressed very quickly to make sure that they are also included in the system. So I would say refineries, for sure. Then we have the maritime sector. We have also the aviation sector with ISAF, with methanol. I think that the targets that are there can also help the deployment of the sector. Yes, I would say that these are, and then of course there is another one that we should not forget. There are hard-to-abate sectors that cannot decarbonize necessarily with electricity, and I was thinking about the steel sector, the transformation of iron ore with hydrogen, to produce direct reduced hydrogen, iron ore. This would be very, very important as well.
To drive demand, yeah.
Exactly, but there is a problem of cost there, as mentioned. So they might be willing to decarbonize with hydrogen, but we are talking about very sensitive price sectors, and they might not be ready
to pay the premium.
To pay the premium, exactly. And this is why we need to look at those sectors that might be ready to do that and absorb this extra price in first stage.
Yeah, that's my point about the business environment. Because if you have like policies based on business opportunity driven approach, then you might find some opportunities to invest. For instance, because if you adapt a refinery, you are repurposing the assets, and then your assets become transition-ready assets. So it's part of the equation. And so you are investing, you are willing to pay more for the technology, for the low emission hydrogen, but because this will bring like a carbon premium to your oil products, gas oil or gasoline, whatever. Those products that are in the market will be lower carbon associated to the life cycle assessment of them. So it's a kind of approach that promotes the willingness to pay for a more expensive technology because it brings value to the company in other side. So that was my previous point about the business environment and how sometimes this could be more effective than try to establish like a very strict standard for sensitive activities. Mm-hmm. How do you react to this kind of approach?
I don't know really how to answer that, because whenever we're talking about the business environment and investment environment in Europe, we're very much focusing on regulation, we're focusing on certification, we're focusing on infrastructure, and
the risking.
Yes, the markets and the risking, in fact, and the fact that sometimes the investors are not yet well aware of the opportunities in the hydrogen sector. So there's a lot of discussions about the bankability, but in fact, it's about understanding what makes sense in the hydrogen sector and what is needed in order to have a viable project, from taking into consideration all these elements, definitions that can be implementable, markets, infrastructure, a cost that can be absorbed or can be supported, and everything together. So it's not as accurate as you say, but this is more what we are having a little bit in our environment there.
Yeah, so you mentioned all those points of demand, and I think that we have many to share in Brazil too. So refineries are a big point of demand in Brazil. Well, fertilizers, we see fertilizers are a very important opportunity. Brazil is a major agricultural country that still imports most of its fertilizers. So producing those fertilizers in the country is very important. The chemical sector, it's another opportunity. So it's a sector that already uses a lot of hydrogen. So offsetting this hydrogen with low emissions hydrogen can help reduce the emissions in this sector as well. And I think there's an opportunity over there there's a challenge and there's also an opportunity. A challenge for identifying the gap in human resources for working in the hydrogen field. And we have seen this gap before. This is something that we are working in this project, the UK PACT project. And we know that we have to create more human resources, but we also have to repurpose new human resources. And how do you see, first of all, this part of demand in Europe, and how do you see this driving the creation for new jobs and for new human resources for hydrogen?
Thank you very much, Gabriel, because you have very well underlined that, in fact, there is a possibility for creating demand in very similar sectors, both in Europe and in Brazil, and that we might have all interest also in working this together with our replacement target of 42%. Chemical industry is very much targeted, of course, but you were referring also to fertilizers, and I think that this is very much linked also to our strategic autonomy.
Not just fertilizer, but the whole hard-to-abate sectors, the transport and the other hard-to-abate products as well.
Absolutely. So I think it's very nice to see that we can work also on developing very common approaches for creating and stimulating market demand on both sides, and also to address all the challenges that this entails. In terms, for instance, of permitting, because we have not mentioned it yet, but this is very important as well. Or
and it's different in each region, right?
Very different from region to region, and we have also maybe some good practices in Europe that help also facilitate the question of permitting, even if there are also some cases that maybe did not work well. And then the question of how do we develop a skilled workforce that is able to develop in numbers and also in capacity and competences according to the needs of this new value chain. And I think that also here we can gain a lot by exchanging with each other experiences. At European level, Hydrogen Europe supported an initiative which is called Green Skills for Hydrogen, that aim also to support the development of skills and education in vocational training. There is also an Hydrogen Academy that's been launched more at high-level education institutions. So I think that this is something that can be of interest and that I would really very much see at the forefront also of cooperation at industry level.
Do you think that the same applies to supply chain, for instance, because in several different industries, Brazil and Europe have like a very complementary industrial supply chain. So how do you see this? Because my personal feeling is that as of today, most of the discussions are about who will be the winners in the supply chain instead of building a global supply chain, and so in a very cooperative way. Because that's the way the things happen. If you don't think that you will have benefits as well, you don't agree on terms and things like that. So how do you see that?
Well, I can tell you that at European level, this is a real challenge, the competitiveness of our supply chains, because we have important technological assets. But the question also of the cost is at stake. So we need to go into industrialization, also to reduce the cost, and also the fact that maybe the deployment of an industry is not happening maybe at the expected pace is having an impact. So hydrogen is considered one of the strategic sectors for the European Union, decarbonization, and the situation of the suppliers. It's very much high in the European agenda, and Hydrogen Europe fully supports also this approach. Now, when we're talking about international relations, I think that the approach also of the European Union has always been that of strategic openness. So this means that with the EU partners, there are ways also of cooperating. If there are markets that are going to deploy massively also hydrogen, there is a possibility also to open factories in these geographies. I think that beyond that also for partners that are minded like the European Union, we can discuss also about what are the criteria that we want the technologies that are going to help produce hydrogen, what are going to be these criteria in terms of sustainability, in terms of social impact, in terms of resilience, because I think that here we have also the possibility of finding an understanding. So this is something also that the European Union has undertaken in the context of the Clean Industrial Deal and the Clean Trade and Investment Partnerships with third countries to find this type of cooperation approaches and understanding of what type of technologies we want to bring forward in the context of our energy transitions.
So that was what I what I meant when I talked about the business environment. Because sometimes it's not only a matter of cost in the facility. So you need a more wider approach to understand that if you bring low emissions hydrogen for a refinery, for instance, it's more expensive than the unabated hydrogen, but then it brings more value to the existing assets. So you transform your refinery in a transition-ready asset. In the between now and the future, let's say all the oil products like gas oil or gasoline, whatever, they will have a lower carbon footprint. So you are decarbonizing already and creating value to the business as a whole, because you are assuring that the assets will have value in the future because you are transforming the industry. So how do you see that? I mean, the fact that a company might have the willingness to pay for low emissions hydrogen because it brings more value to the business as a whole.
I think that this is central to the discussion that we are having. How can we convince really the companies to invest into hydrogen? Seen from the European perspective, in order to ensure that there is an attractiveness of the sector, I think that there are a number of boxes that need to be ticked, and this is how we interpret it so far. First of all, the regulatory environment that is stable and that is somehow attractive, that is feasible, that is implementable. Then there is a market as well. The question of offtake with the targets that we have mentioned, and here you have put the example of refineries, and here refineries are not really clearly spotted into the EU system. So we need to start addressing that very clearly and understand how can they, by decarbonizing hydrogen, also contribute to the achievement of the RED III targets, which is not yet the case. So we need to target that very quickly. Then the question of infrastructure. We have so far very much integrated projects in Europe. So most of production that is being now put into place, it's integrated with a production facility next to the off-taker, which is a refinery. So this is what's the reality right now. But in the future, if we need more amounts, production, location, and that of the off-taker might not be in the same place. So we really need to cater already for the infrastructure. And then we need also to address also the cost issues, the premiums, etc. And incentives in the early stages are very important, possibly with grants, because they have a little bit more of impact. In Europe, I think that a very good example is that of the Innovation Fund. 3/4 of the projects that are more advanced have received support grants from the Innovation Fund. So this shows really that they can be a little bit more impactful and also provide certainty concerning the amounts that they are going to receive. We have seen that there are options, etc., but we still need to see, even if they are extremely attractive as well, what's going to be the result. But we don't still have this feedback. So yeah, I think that you need a number of issues. You need to tick the box on several points in order to make sure that you have a project that is somehow bankable, that investors are going to come to the hydrogen sector. But first step is going to make them aware also of the importance, relevance of hydrogen.
Opportunities. Business opportunities as
well. Business
well.
Opportunities, exactly. And this is something that we still need to work very much on. I think that all efforts also that public banks can do in this direction, institutions, etc., will be very much welcome, because we see that sometimes there is an important alignment between public sector and industry, but investors are not there yet fully. And I think that now we start having an environment that provides some sort of certainty for them to be a little bit more interested into the sector and invest.
So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I think that we are running out of time. So I'd like to ask for one final remarks from maybe each one of us three for what can we expect for the relationship between Brazil and the European Union for the development of the low emissions hydrogen economy. So who wants to start?
Well, find the opportunities and build a business case. I think that's a very important issue. You might have the policy, you might have the framework, but if you not find the business model, you will not implement the change we need to decarbonize the economy.
Okay, thank you.
I would say let's work together from now, very hard. Let's bring together the industry. Lots of things to learn from each other, from each one's experience, so that the progress of hydrogen can be accelerated with this type of support. And let's also cooperate with the governmental level. I think that there are challenges like the infrastructure that I was mentioning before that cannot be tackled with industry alone, because I think that investments there are very important, and we need also some sort of planification, and the public sector is going to be essential there. So let's work hand in hand. And the good news there is that we have already a thriving cooperation between the European Union and the LAC region, and also including Brazil. And I think that we have the good background for this to happen.
Great. So I'd say I am very optimistic. I see many synergies, and based on our discussions here today, I see that we are looking at the same horizon, and I see possibilities, for example, in the convergency in regulations and in certification schemes, and of course the cooperation for human resources and for establishing infrastructure for hydrogen. So I see a very good future for those partnerships. And well, with that, I think that we can wrap up our episode for today. And thank you very much for being here with us today. And we see you in the next episode.
Yes.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.